Today I'm going to open with a quote. Even if one is imprisoned in some ghastly dictatorship's jail where no action is possible, serenity comes from the knowledge that one does not accept this. So wrote Ayn Rand. And today we're going to be talking about the hostages, the 18 hostages that have been released recently. And we're going to talk about the hostages and their stories and what we've learned about their situation whilst they were in captivity. The manner in which they were treated and held, for example, and also the heroism that kept them going in 480 or so days of being hostages in Gaza.
Welcome to today's reality show. Our guests today joining us are Razi and Michael. Hi, guys. Michael,
Hello.
before I come to you for opening comments, I just would like to say that talking about this kind of issue is quite difficult for me because, of course, one rejoices from the fact that human beings are being released from captivity. The hostages are being released, and even though in a stupidly small amount of people at a time. But what really hurts me is the fact that what we're seeing here is a sort of normalization of the fact that hostages should be strong enough to hold on, because the suggestion here is that at some point somebody will be taken hostage, and you will have to learn to survive in the situation. And as Ayn Rand would point out, here we're missing. We're getting caught in the detail, in the concrete, and we're losing sight of the principle with which we wouldn't have hostages in the first place. But how do you see this the situation, Michael?
Well, the two primary tenets of Western civilization are life and liberty. Now, these people's lives were at stake, and approximately a third to a half of the hostages are dead. So their lives have been deprived. The other ones all had their liberty deprived, all of them. And that's a massive violation of their rights as human beings, full stop. You are absolutely right that the world and the Western media in particular have done a wretched job and are now sort of acting, we'll get into it, I'm sure, that they're letting Palestinian prisoners go as well. These are not Palestinian prisoners. These are, for the most part, convicted criminals, and for the other, they're enemy combatants who are clearly terrorists and so on and so forth. And this is normalized against people who did nothing except, in some cases, attend a music festival, and in other cases, just go about their daily life and were taken hostage. I think we and others need to prevent this from becoming normalized. This notion that we don't negotiate with terrorists, which was an old school thought. Obviously, the new enlightened geniuses who run our diplomacy departments have thrown that out. And I can see nothing except to appease the terrorists here. And they're thrilled because now they know if they take hostages, they're going to get a lot more hostages back. The ratios are 60 or 70 to 1. Something like that. So I think it's horrendous for everybody. I think it's wonderful to see the people back, don't get me wrong. And it's heart-wrenching, and I'm here in Israel at this time, and it's, the people are elated. But let's all remember that we gave Sinwar back, the man who orchestrated October 7th, we gave him back on the last round of hostage exchange. And what did we get? We got October 7th with 1,300 dead Israelis and dead soldiers now, and so on and so forth. So I see no good long-term end here, and I see this notion that we should all expect to be hostages and figure out a way to deal with it as ridiculous and further ridiculousness from the West.
And Razi, your thoughts about whether by focusing on these hostages, we miss the notion of hostages generally, and those hostages are the future, who will have the same kind of faces, young and old, equally innocent, that we don't see because we're focused both on the reuniting of the families that we see before us right now and the joy that comes from that fact.
Yeah, I mean, as Michael said, we need to prevent this from being normalized, but we're doing the exact opposite. We're guaranteeing this happening again and again. And there's the question is kind of when are we going to learn? And I think the answer is never, because if we didn't learn from October 7th, like why would we learn if it's 20,000 dead and 5,000 hostages? Like why would that be any different, except in that we would have more prisoners to have to release. I mean, this is and this in Israel, certainly in the way it's covered in the media, there was a short period of time, kind of like in the US immediately after 9/11, where there was a realization that this is an enemy that can't be dealt with in any way except force, except defeating them. And that then there was a switch at some point, and it got to the point. One of the things that I remember noticing had changed was Hamas would release occasionally a video of a hostage speaking, and Israeli media would not show that video because they knew it was psychological warfare. Whatever words are being said are the words, or words that at the very least are approved by Hamas. So why would you show it? And at some point they dropped the act. They dropped the act that this is anything other than the Israeli media taking the side, at least in the negotiations, the side of Hamas, because and again, I fully understand the desire to see the hostages back, but that was basically placed above all Israeli citizens' safety in the future.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that strikes me about the particular 18 that we've seen released so far, and of course, it's the fact that Hamas are controlling the entire PR of this release and every element of what's seen about them on the day of the release. And therefore, some of the facts that we learned subsequently about how they were kept and the conditions they were in and some of their experiences are lost in the second and third days of news about them. Whereas you've already had all of simply the pictures of reuniting, or you've had all of the hideous Hamas level propaganda in the streets with the guns and the certificates and all of the charade that has gone on with that. So I think that's a particular concern here, is that and that's what we're going to try and do a little in this episode, is highlight some of those conditions. One of the things that I do notice about some of these early releases, and in particular in the case of Emily Damari, who is the British Israeli who was released early on in this set of releases, and to me, her name is the fact that strikes me. Is the fact that most British people do not know her name, in the way that they do know the name of Nazarene Zaghari Radcliffe, for example, the woman held in Iran that the UK ultimately paid about 400 million pounds to shortly before she was finally released. That was in the news constantly. However, the case of Emily Damari was, and her name and her recognition factor, the fact that she was the only British Israeli held in captivity by Hamas, was not in the public consciousness. But pictures every day, of course, of Palestinians certainly were.
And of course, we've seen how Israel in the last year and a half has not really engaged with the propaganda war. This is not a fight that Israel has chosen not to take part. And that's why we hear the BBC talking about Israeli prisoners being released. Prisoners. I mean, the other side, the Palestinian side, is so embedded in mainstream media. The lies that the Palestinians spread have been so sucked up by all the media and various institutions in the West that even the stuff comes out from their mouths without even thinking. It's automatized. It's the kind of thing they've been doing for the last year and a half. That's why we still have lefties here in Britain, for example, waving PLO flags, terrorist organization flags openly. And that's why somebody burning a Quran is arrested by a group of policemen. Even if burning a Quran in Britain is not even an offense as such. So we see that the imbalance between the two sides is so incredibly weighed towards the Palestinian side the propaganda seems to be going and being kind of self-fueled, self-propelled by the amount of stuff that's out there. And we've seen this surge of anti-Semitism in the West, especially in Europe, to levels which are absolutely disgraceful, especially in the light of the 80 years of the Holocaust. Michael, how do you think we could, or the West or Israel, could try and start reacting against this kind of continuous propaganda war that's being carried out? I mean, should we watch the images of these people being released, these hostages returning home? I mean,
well, yeah. I mean, I think a couple of things. I don't think you're going to be able to stop people from being elated about the singular situations, and they really are singular in the grand scheme of things, where people came back. And like I said, I'm thrilled to see it. And I'm a pretty objectivist guy. I mean, I'm pretty rational and logical, and pride myself on trying to look at the bigger picture. But these are tough situations. That said, you cannot make public policy around it. And the fact is a couple of things. One, Israel never really went into Gaza with the intention of eliminating Hamas. The way they fought the war, and whether it was Biden or Netanyahu or a combination of the two of them, there was no chance that we were going to eliminate Gaza by going in piecemeal and having surgical strikes. It's like having a patient with metastatic cancer in 50 sites in the body and doing surgery on 4 of them. It's ridiculous. And by the time you're done the 4 surgeries and the patient's recovered, the cancer has spread to 20 other sites. The patient is going to die if you approach it that way. The second point is that the Israeli media has played into this as well. And even the rightish wing media here, which is fairly strong, and certainly I don't really watch the Netanyahu Channel 14 kind of media here, but the rightish media here has even softened a lot of their rhetoric, and even the rhetoric that said we should never negotiate with Hamas and they need to be obliterated was never founded on any kind of philosophical principles. It was more of a revenge kind of principle. But the fact of the matter is, I'll make a prediction. If you look, and I'll take you to America for a minute. So Trump has been in office for 3 weeks, and he's done some good things and some things I don't really like, but he's been in office 3 weeks. Has anyone noticed how many campus protests have gone on in the last 3 weeks? Has anyone? Are we talking about it? Is it on the cover of CNN or Fox News? If you want to look at both sides, the answer is there haven't been many, and I'm not aware of any, frankly. And it's very simple, because the tone from the top changed. And the tone from the top says the adults are back in town and we're not going to tolerate this anymore. It's a clear violation. He passed an executive order that basically reiterated the 14th Amendment that said you can't discriminate against people on the basis of religion and a lot of other things. And it does actually apply to Jews also. And by the way, Jews are a minority. And he put an executive order in that said Jews are a minority. So until the leaders of these very, very corrupted, morally bankrupt Western countries decide that they understand that the future of Islamic totalitarianism is the elimination of the West, until they decide that, we will continue to see these problems and this moral equivalence. And you're right, the news media is sluggish over here to respond, but you don't see them covering the lack of protest. And it will just die. It's been 3 weeks. This tone from the top needs to change. It needs to change all over the world. And the last point I'll make is that the Jewish leaders need to stop with their brilliant, reasoned, rational responses to everything that gets into the weeds, and start with global statements about life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, or whatever the equivalent is for those countries. But we get into this minutia of who owned the land 6,000 years ago and who evolved where and all this other crap, which applies to no other country in the world. So that's the way I think we have to do it. We got to change the tone from the top, and the corresponding counter from the Israeli and Jewish media, and frankly, freedom-loving media like us. Not all of us on the show are Jewish, and they shouldn't be, because they're coming after everyone, they being the Muslim hordes that want to make a caliphate again. That's got to change. And once we do that, we will see that people who like to be led from the front will change. Until then, it won't happen.
Thank you, Michael. Razi, we've seen dual nationality hostages released who are also American, for example. Do you think when it comes to dual nationality, it doesn't matter what other nationality they are, they're just Jewish, and therefore their just Jewishness is what defines whether they get priority in media coverage or whether they're relegated to a secondary mention after the Palestinians? Razi, let me come to you.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, look, the fact that somebody's dual nationality is important in that, yeah, the other country should be, should care about this, and yeah, as you mentioned, they don't. But and that's again unique in the sense that if it was elsewhere, other countries would care more, but here there's sort of an excuse. And what were they doing there is one of the things that people like to ask. And yeah, I mean, look, I as always am a bit less enthusiastic about Trump than Michael is, but I think I actually want to see more of these protests, because one thing he said that I look forward to is kicking out the students for Hamas who were not actually American citizens. You're muted, Michael.
At least one was deported already.
Oh, nice.
On a visa, yes. And it was I forget which country he was deported to, not one of the expected ones, but he was on a visa and he raised globalized the Intifada crap and the death to America, death to Israel crap. And he was arrested and deported, just like every illegal immigrant in the US is, which is separate from this, which is to say, if you're on a visa and you came here to learn, if you want to kill us, we're not going to keep you here. What a concept. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and look, Trump is also deporting people that I wouldn't, but somebody mentioned to me a couple of days ago, I noticed I'm in the US at the moment. I have 4 stops in the US, and the cheapest of them hotel-wise is Manhattan. And I'm talking like Manhattan right next to Penn Station. And somebody told me it's because the hotels were housing people that are no longer there. But yeah, when it comes to pro-Hamas students, I'm all for that. But I did want to make a point about something a hostage said that I think is pretty symbolic of how Israel is reacting to this. Because yeah, as Michael said, it's an emotional response, which is why on October 7th and in the days after, the emotional response was actually directed in the right direction. It's like we have to destroy Hamas. They said I would have said and keep saying, we have to destroy Palestinianism. We have to recognize that the Palestinian people are the enemy. But at least it was, people realize that war is happening, and maybe we should fight it too, rather than let the other side fight it. And that turned into, still an emotional reaction, which was there are hostages there. We need to get him out at any price, and any price is not what do you say in a negotiation, especially one that you shouldn't be taking part in the first place. But there was this story in the Times of Israel 3 days ago, and it was about Liri Elbag, who was released, and it said Liri Elbag says she proposed captivity clip to captors and refused to enter the tunnels, but the captivity clip that she proposed, so one paragraph in this article says, Albag said she appealed to Hamas's desire to increase public pressure on the Israeli government to strike a deal, which I found to be such an amazing confession across the board, and like especially with the fact that the media and the Times of Israel is better than most Israeli media, but that they're saying something like this. Yes, there was a full realization that the pro hostage deal crowd in Israel was doing Hamas's bidding. That is what they were doing, and it was so clear that Hamas took full advantage of it. And I of course don't blame her for doing that and just wanting to get out, but I blame everybody who wasn't a hostage and advocated for it.
Yeah, and that's exactly part of the problem, isn't it? Because we hear the hostages were held in UNRWA facilities, for example. I mean, we're not talking an allegation. We're talking about a person, an innocent person, who was held in an UNRWA UN-funded facility. The same facility, the same organization that UN has been saying it's got nothing to do with Hamas. We are innocent. We got nothing to do with it. Stop defunding us. And, again, proved to be part of the Hamas machine, war machine. And then we heard about people held in cages. We heard about people being forced to work, to do the chores, just like a slave. They already deprived of the freedom. They were deprived of the possibility of not have to work for their captive. But that didn't go down well, did it? And I wonder, why is it, Michael, that these stories are not breaking through in the West? We don't hear the stories of the hostages, the former hostages, once they come out of captivity, once they're released. We hear something about, oh, this family is now happy because being reunited. Look at Hamas, how kind that they returned the hostages, how kind that Hamas is sticking to the deal. I mean, what the hell is going on? Why these stories are not coming through?
Yeah, I think Razi did a good job alluded to it. It's kind of the same question of, well, if you're a citizen from another country and you're Jewish and you're in Israel, what are you here for? I mean, why are you in Israel? Why aren't you satisfied with your own country? Which is pretty ironic given all the immigrants from all the countries that are in the Western countries that we keep talking about. But anyway, it is again the absolute lack of moral direction on the West. I mean, the media, don't forget, the media in the West, despite all the election results in the US and some of the election results in Europe where people have gone right-wing and so on, they aren't changing. They're not admitting any mistakes. They're not admitting that maybe we need to stop holding equivalent people that are frankly dirtbags and animals, equivalent with tax-paying, good, peace-loving citizens who just want to raise a family and work and behave and cut their lawn. And what's happened is that we've all put up with these elite media idiots, and they are so incredibly stupid. And you listen to them, and like, what have you ever done in the world except report that a terrorist is essentially the same as a good person? But it's all part of the same thing. I personally am not surprised by any of this. There is no outcry at the UN I mean, there were 30 Europeans who finally signed on that we need to get rid of UNRWA and that the UN needs to get rid of it. Really? 15 months later, you finally got that? It wasn't enough evidence in the last 15 months? And this, by the way, the only reason they're doing this is because Trump is going to put an axe into the entire UN. Never mind, he isn't going to fund. He's not setting up the funding for UNRWA again. And I do hope, and sorry to toot Trump's horn, but this isn't hard stuff. I mean, anybody here, if you were elected, you would do this stuff because it's really simple, the good and evil here. It's so simple. And we would talk about, first of all, we'd start with the fact that people that are locked up for almost 500 days, you tell the audience, think about it. You're in jail tonight in a tiny little cell that doesn't meet any standard of any Western jail. For the worst criminals in the entire West don't get put in these cells. And probably not even in Guantanamo, our horrible American prison, that doesn't follow guidelines. Worse conditions than that. And you're going to do that for 500 days with the chance that you're going to be murdered, tortured and murdered every single day from then? Why? That's the first part of this whole thing. That's the simple stuff. But nobody in the Western media really wants to bring that uncomfortable, inconvenient fact up. And why they don't? Because their entire agenda is to normalize chaos and destruction. I don't know how else to put it. If I sound like I'm crazy, ask me what I'm saying that doesn't conform to the behavior of the press since October 7th. You can say I'm crazy. It's not like that. The people just think that these people in Gaza want a better life. Based on what? They've had Hamas since 2006. They want a better life. They're out there cheering that this is victory. Have you seen the pictures of Gaza? They think this is victory. The fact is that terrorists do think this is victory. And the West is colluding. And as long as people keep tuning in to idiots on CNN and MSNBC and so on, and look, the Fox has its own issues with the religion and stuff, but as long as they keep listening to this crap, it's going to continue. Now, hopefully we'll have some leadership that will get up there and say, and by the way, Trump sued, and he's won a couple of suits already against the media where there was clear libel and stuff. And now there's a whole thing about how Harris's interview was doctored. We need the Jews especially, but any freedom-loving people, especially the lawyers, need to stand up and nail these folks. Nail them. Ain't happening. The Jews are busy figuring out what we can do to be nice, to be liked still after all this, after the second Holocaust.
Yeah.
And that's why it's happening, Marco. It's completely consistent with the entire behavior throughout this entire thing.
Yeah, absolutely, Michael. And I think in the case of Emily Damari, for example, which is one of those who was held in an UNRWA facility, and she was shot twice, but not given medical assistance at all during that period. And that's just an example of the different way in which you know, the Palestinians, the Gazans, and Hamas, all of which are involved in this, and can't necessarily be separated into their separate entities, are responsible for. And of course, next to this, you've got the fact that the way Hamas presents this whole hostage stuff is talking two sides at the same time, isn't it? It's exploiting the fact that these are innocent Israelis. And emphasizing the fact they're innocent Israelis in the sense that it's trying to use them as leverage for Israel to negotiate for the return of, and at the same time they're redressing hostages in like military uniforms to pretend that they were reservists or soldiers when they weren't, in order to claim that they were not innocent hostages in the sense that they were military, is the message they're telling their own side. And the psychology involved in all of this exploitation is absolutely horrendous, isn't it? The same as when you see the white trucks, reminiscent of the October the 7th itself, and all of the Hamas soldiers hanging off the back of it. And in yesterday's hostage release, I think it was, when they deliberately used a similar setup on the day of the hostage release to remind people of that, showing that Hamas is still alive and strong despite where we're at in this stage of the war, and that you know, how is this a defeat for Hamas if they're able to still do what they were able to do on October the 7th and demonstrate it to us in image form in such a flagrant way? Razi, your thoughts?
First of all, thanks Ori for the super chat. And Ori doesn't say anything with the super chat, but a troll in the chat says some stuff about Ori, like that he's funding a demonic cult. So on behalf of the demonic cult, we appreciate it. Well, I maybe I do pay too much attention to the trolls, but sometimes they're funny. You know, one of the hostages that was released was Naama Levi. We talked about her in the past on the show, because she, you know, she was 19 when she was taken. She was a soldier, and she was very active throughout her youth in all these sort of peace movements and so on. And there's a video that Hamas released of when she and others were taken, and they're being filmed there in some building, and she says, "Oh, call my friend in Gaza, I'll give you his number," and so on. Like, really thinking, oh, you know, these terrorists, probably all they really want is peace, but they're attacking us because Netanyahu, and I need to make it clear that and this is a big problem that I have. And anybody who thinks that I'm in any way a Netanyahu supporter, scroll back through this channel. I mean, it was days after October 7th, and people who generally agreed with me that Netanyahu should go were upset with me for doing a show Netanyahu must go like days after October 7th. I stand by that decision, but that doesn't mean that everybody who is against Netanyahu I'm in agreement with. And I think a big part of this protest movement is an anti-Netanyahu protest movement, and it doesn't matter what he does. They will be against him. So I'm sure that if this deal goes through all the stages and all the hostages are released, you will still see a protest movement against him for not doing it sooner or whatever it is. I'm also and I dread this moment for many reasons, but we will, I assume, soon get confirmation that the Bibas family is dead. The mother, Shiri, and the kids, Kfir and Ariel. And I, when Israel was about to basically rescue 6 hostages, and Hamas knew it and wanted to prevent what had happened before and just shot them in the head. There were immediate protests in Israel against the government, not against Hamas, not saying enough with negotiating with these monsters, just take them out. So I think this is a big problem in Israel, in Israeli politics. And I say this as somebody who again is anti-Netanyahu, but very much for Israel winning, regardless of who the prime minister is. And if he does something good, I would support it. Of course, I'm very much against his part in negotiating in any way with Hamas, but these protests were, of course, from the other side. You are not capitulating enough to Hamas's demands, so that was unfortunate. And I think Israel will pay for that in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that really hurts is that even today, despite everything we learned since October the 7th, 2023, the median, a good chunk of the population in the West, and certainly in Israel as well, seem not to understand what's happened. Either they don't understand or they don't accept it. I mean, we know that the majority of Muslim population in the world doesn't believe the event of October the 7th, doesn't believe that Islam can be so incredibly inspiring for monsters and savages all across the world. But that's what happens. The savages themselves broadcasted themselves while committing the act they committed. So there's no trickery there. But also we learn from the stories of the released hostages what the conditions were and how they were kept. Some of them were kept in tunnels. Some of them never saw the light of day. Some of them were kept in safe houses. Now, why on earth Palestinians would have safe houses after October the 7th? That's something that the Israeli state has to account for. Why on earth weren't they flattened? And of course, there was intelligence. They wouldn't know where Hamas might have been. But the primary concern was do not harm Palestinians, because then the public opinion abroad will get all uppity and accuse us of being the bad guys, which happens anyway, whether you're careful or not. I mean, how can anyone take the side of somebody who goes into Israel, butchered over 1,000 people and kidnaps children? What kind of culture? I mean, multiculturalism is a failed discipline, failed idea in the first place. But how can you even contemplate the culture, the Palestinian culture, which kidnaps children and murders them? Is anything that can be considered even equivalent to any other kind of culture in the West is just beyond me. And they still carry on, still have the idiots in the left that wave the flags and chants Free Palestine.
Yeah. Now, I did open the show with a quote from Ayn Rand from the metaphysical versus the man-made. And one of the things within that she was talking about was how to cope with the things, even when you're in a dictatorship as jail, for example, which is exactly what the hostages situation they were in. And a lot of the stuff that I've read about the hostages' experiences is heroic in focusing on what the human mind is capable of focusing on when its survival is the key. And reading about hostages who walked up and down the cells in which they were held, counting the tiles, for example, to monitor the distance they've done, or solving maths problems within their heads in order to keep their brain sharp. That kind of thing is trying to retain the rational in an utterly irrational setting. Something that reminds me enormously of stories I've read about the Holocaust, and how obviously many Jewish people, or not just Jewish people, but people within the concentration camps managed to survive those horrendous years, was by trying to find the rational and the logical, and to focus on it in the midst of the assault of irrationality that they're bombarded with. Michael.
Yeah, I think you could say the same happened probably in the Russian prison camps and the gulags, and Solzhenitsyn's work, has a lot of that kind of stuff as well. I'm sorry to be a broken record on this, but I think it's very simple. I'll add one more element to it besides the leadership. Our professors, and particularly in the humanities in the West, have done a marvelous job of panning capitalism and panning success, and managing to create a bunch of rather pathetic generation. And I know every generation bemoans the next generation and everything, but we clearly have a generation of kids that are upside down. And while they're busy tweeting on their iPhones that came about because of physics and engineering and material science and creativity and innovation, which the world had never seen before, ever. And didn't come out of communism, and didn't come out of tribalism, and didn't come out of Africa and voodoo and tribes, and it certainly didn't come out of Arab terrorism. Busy panning all the success that led up to that at their $80,000 a year college campuses, and they didn't just start in college. So this is a wonderful collusion, and I don't know, I have no idea why the humanities in the West have gone this way. But if you ask why we are seeing all of this, I believe it's relatively simple. We have been teaching our kids that showing up for class is enough. We've taught them that everybody is equal, that all people are basically okay, and we're all basically the same, and we're, quote, all in this together, which is, of course, the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. We are those of us who pay taxes and have jobs and contribute to society and don't go try to kill other people. We're in it together, but we're against all the people that are against that stuff. And then they go on and tell these kids that the West is bad and everything that you heard was good and everything that got you to the life that you have is bad and was done because somebody oppressed somebody else. And then you send them in to colleges, and then you have Joe Biden and his henchmen and the West basically saying it's okay to protest and say death to America. Forget death to Israel. Death to America is okay. Globalize the Intifada? What are you talking about? They globalized it in Gaza. Have you seen what Gaza looks like? So I really don't think we have to look very far. I don't think you need a degree in anthropology or sociology or political science. As Ayn Rand said, we are the philosophy of a nation sits at the basis, at the foundation of a nation. And the West, almost all of the nations in the West have completely lost their way. Instead of applauding the remarkable success, they are panning it. The greatest irony comes from those who hate Elon Musk. He had the two most important green initiatives in the world in America, Solar City and Tesla, the first major, big, huge solar panels company and the first big Electrify America company. They hate him on the left, but he did their Green Deal. It wasn't some asshole communist who thought up something or a terrorist. This was an innovator. And he innovated, and he brought us things that we never had before. So I think we, like Ayn Rand said, and I think we know on this show, that until we go back to some basic, simple concepts, that you work your butt off, nobody owes you anything, you work hard, you do right, you play by the rules, you don't hurt other people, because your liberty and their liberty are equivalent, and then you can have a society. Anything else is a problem. And we have allowed those problems to sink in, and our professors, and I use the term with a small p in quotes, have enabled this, particularly in the humanities.
Yeah, a part of the problem is a collusion, isn't it? People who choose to believe that the world is unknowable, who chose to be led by somebody else because it's easier, because to realize that reality is out there, and if you want to obtain something, you have to work, means that the responsibility is 100% on you. So you have to take the steps that take you towards the place where the point where you want to get to. But of course, by admitting, oh, it's beyond me, nobody knows anything, God or the society or my dictator or my president or whatever will tell me what to do. And that's effectively abrogating the reason that allows you to survive in this world. That's what they're really doing.
Thank you to Aviva K for your super chat, and also to Roland Horvath for yours. Roland says, more funding for the demonic cult. Thank you very much, Roland. And let me come to the head of this branch of the demonic cult, Razi.
Yeah, so to Michael's point, the fact that every generation kind of bemoans the next generation, that's if there's anything I can sort of force myself to be optimistic about, I'm thinking, okay, I don't see late teens, early 20s Razi as a role model for anything. And I think many people, they probably don't look at their at what they were at that age as something they're later super proud of. I'm sure there are exceptions. And so I wonder if these people will become better. But I also say this as an early 40s person who tweets all the time, but I don't tweet against the existence of technology that allows me to tweet. But yeah, and by the way, their music also sucks, the next generation, but that's a different story. But I do wonder, like, it's these people are so far gone that some of them from time to time you do see somebody saying, oh, I went to all these protests and now I have realized that I was wrong, but what percentage of them are actually going to do that, and what percentage are going to end up being the next Francesca Albanese style anti-Semitic explainers, people who tell you why it's actually the right thing to support a cause that is essentially just finishing the job that Hitler started, and putting some humanitarian spin on it, which is unbelievable, and the fact that it's they're getting away with it tells you actually that the previous generation, our generation, also kind of sucks in many ways. Yeah, our music was better, but our ideas weren't necessarily that much better, because the people putting these ideas into young people's minds are from our generation.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I read about some of the heroic side of it, and I do want to make sure we cover both sides of what we're talking about here, because there is a side that is worth highlighting as well, in terms of the strength and resilience of the Israeli people and the Israeli hostages in this horrendous situation. One of them wrote a journal, for example, every day, writing a few thoughts down. Of course, that journal was taken from him, but by his Hamas captors by the end of it. But again, that struck me as a link back to how some of the people coped with the Holocaust. Many people wrote about their experiences and buried them within the grounds of the concentration camp, not knowing whether they'd ever be read or found, but simply as some sort of way of making sure that they were fighting the system within the limited manner they could, and keeping their thoughts in as a controlled a manner as possible. And then counter to that is, of course, the fact that some of these hostages are hearing about their own families on the radio whilst they're in captivity, either thinking they're dead or and finding out they're alive, or vice versa. And all of that is a psychological horrendous burden for anyone to bear, and not to mention, of course, the Bibas family themselves, and what that the release in the order that it's been done, with the lack of knowledge provided by Hamas, and the way that that's been deliberately held back from the world, and of course from the father, is quite horrendous. Michael.
Yeah, but we and it is difficult for me to even read most of these stories because some days are so long for me doing my job, which I love, and working hard to think of doing nothing, which may be the hardest thing I would, but and also being fear for my life, and also being afraid. It's one thing to get, I suppose, to get shot in the head and be dead, but to be tortured. And there were hostages that were clearly tortured for a very long time before they were killed. And probably there will be in the next batch of hostages when they run out of the relatively okay ones, which are clearly the ones coming out now, relatively, there will be people with stories that probably make Auschwitz look at least competitive. I can't imagine that. And we're sitting here and we're surprised. And I guess we're surprised. I'm not surprised. I hear these stories and I think, well, the fact that any of the hostages are still alive just shows you how clever Hamas is and how they understand the utter stupidity and moral bankruptcy of the West. They understand the extremely high price that Israel puts on any life, even at the risk of harming many more lives, just as they did with Sinwar. Because I've had many arguments here with Israelis how you can let out any terrorists after you let out Sinwar and he killed so many of you. And they can't get past the immediacy. And that's when government policy has to step in. But I don't know why we're surprised. These are terrorists. They are the dirt of humanity. They walk around cheering that that Hamas has been victorious when it has been leveled. It is a disaster zone. None of them are starving, of course, because of the morons in the West that have given aid. But this is a group of people they're not human beings by any sense of the imagination now. They are back in the 7th century or the 2nd century BC or something, and they might as well go back and live in caves. And I make that analogy on purpose because we know a lot of them in Afghanistan who are terrorists, i.e. Al-Qaeda, did live in caves and still do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it should not surprise anyone that they are capable of any monstrosity.
Yeah, and from the outside, I mean, Raz is probably more familiar with this, but I find absolutely not disgusting, but very off-putting the fact that the deal includes the return of 33 hostages, a third of which are probably dead. I mean, who else but a Democrat would strike a deal like this? Can you imagine the Orange Man accepting these kind of terms? I mean, how is it that a country that finds itself as the only democratic state in the Middle East accept this kind of terms? What's behind the psyche of the government or the state as a whole? I really don't understand how you can accept the body of some people when other hostages are still alive and they're suffering. It's beyond me, really. And so much so that, for example, the 5 Thai hostages that were released will receive Israeli citizenship because we've been told Israel is such a racist state where nobody else can live freely. Well, these are Thais. They got their citizenship because Israel accepts people from all over the world, whatever creed or whatever sexuality, whatever difference they have, there is accepted in Israel, unlike other places. Razi.
Yeah, I mean they weren't Israeli citizens. They were working in Israel. But obviously I completely disagree with you that this is a Democrat versus Republican issue. They're all bad on this. Trump could have said, before I sign any executive orders, I'm calling Netanyahu and saying, you either drop this deal or it's over between us. I mean, if Trump realized it, but no, he sent his envoy even before becoming president to pressure Netanyahu into this deal, which of course Biden was all for, and it's very much a Biden-like deal, but Biden couldn't pressure Netanyahu into it, and Trump is I guess more convincing on these things. So, and of course Netanyahu is still to blame because he still should say no to whoever is the president. But yeah, this is a thing in Israel that Israel has exchanged living terrorists for dead bodies in the past. And again, just like with the Gilad Shalit deal, which for one living soldier, Israel released 1,000 terrorists. The other side is paying attention and knows, okay, we can take hostages, we can even kill them or let them die or whatever, and Israel will still pay a price in living terrorists and in withdrawing from territories where they should be present. So yeah, everybody is to blame, including Trump.
Yeah. And when you see these hostage release days and how they are PR managed by Hamas, and you see, for example, hostages on a stage holding up their release certificates, for example, and you do put yourself in their shoes, and you recognize the difficulty of the position they're in. They're literally minutes potentially from their own release. And yet they're having to do this. And even a simple gesture of defiance, such as refusing to hold up your certificate, might not only jeopardize your own release, but of course end up punishing the other hostages who are still held in captivity. That being, of course, a typical Nazi method of punishing someone else for a crime which supposed crime or disobedience which you've committed to further the irrationality and the evil and the psychological torture. So I mean, all of it makes your heart go out. That's for sure. Michael, any last thoughts as we come towards the end of the episode in terms of summing up how we should view the experience so far from what we've learned of these particular hostages in captivity and the next stages that we know are coming?
Well, yeah. So I mean, I agree with Razi generally that this deal stinks to high heaven. I mean, it is a disgrace. After, and not only that, for the 1,200 plus Israelis that were killed on October 7th, and for the 250 hostages, and also for the 600 or 700 Israeli soldiers who have died fighting in Gaza for really not a great reason. Yeah. For the point of surgical strikes and not bombing the shit out of them and leveling Gaza, which is clearly what should have been done. I do hope, and I don't believe this is true, but I do hope there's some bigger plan going on. I do hope that Netanyahu, when he's meeting with Trump now, that there's a plan to cut off the head of the snake for once and for all, which is, of course, the Ayatollah sitting in Iran. Obviously, Israel debunked the entire myth of the amazing Iranian military with one simple. It wasn't simple, but really it was one air run. Everybody should remember that. 130 aircraft involved in Israel took out all of Tehran's defenses. And if we had a normal president in the United States and normal Western leaders, or it had been World War II with somebody who actually wanted to win, then Israel would have sent a second wave and taken out Tehran, and that would have been the end of Iran in terms of the Islamic Revolution. But of course, we're in a different world now with a lame duck president, demented president in the US at the time, and Western leaders who have no idea which direction is up. This will continue. Now, I have a little more confidence that there's something else going on. I will just say, take a look at the information leaking about how Egypt isn't going to take any Gaza terrorists in, but actually Egypt is taking Gaza terrorists in. At least that's the couple of reports I saw today. At least 50 of the released terrorists were sent into Egypt and not back to Gaza, which is terrific, despite what the Egyptians have said. They're going to Jordan. Trump has full weight on that. We'll see. And we'll just have to see. But the deal, I mean, I completely agree with Razi. This is a disgraceful deal. The last point I will make is the Israelis should have known better. To allow this crap to go on, this staging, is absurd. And don't forget, Israel put their foot down at some point and said recently, and just said, we're not going to let any of the people back into the north of Gaza until you clean up your act. But they didn't demand that they just have a quiet release ceremony the way it should be normal. They didn't do that. They soft pedaled it and said, you're just not allowed to have this giant, event and intimidating the hostages all the way until they're handed over to the Red Cross. So it is a despicable event of Western weakness and caving to emotion instead of clarity. And there is clear rationale. There's enough people saying what we're saying around here to do this. I think it will only invite the next attack. And I hope to God I'm not killed. I was surrounded by missiles when Iran sent them to Israel. I was on the runway in Ben Gurion. I was surrounded by 20 missiles around Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv. And luckily, none of them hit us. And in true Israeli fashion, of course, we took off 3 hours later to Athens, where my family was headed. But this will happen again. And frankly, the people that didn't stop it now will have that blood on their hands.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to close, where can people find out more about you, Michael?
LinkedIn, Kaufman with 2 Fs.
Thank you. Razi, final thought and contact details?
Yes. Yeah, the thing that I'm worried about, and I think we've spoken about it on this channel as well, is that Iran will just sit it out because they are more afraid of Trump and should be more afraid of Trump than they were of Biden, and might not do the things that, and it's also kind of in their interest, and I use that term very loosely, to wait and rebuild whatever had been damaged. And my fear is Netanyahu and Trump will buy that, and because then when they do whatever they do, in the next when whoever's president next is in office, Trump can always say, if I was president, this would never have happened, which would maybe be somewhat true. But when you were president, this was being planned, and you, in a sense, knew about it. And so I'll once again say, I hope we praise Trump that's what I want to do. Praise Trump every single day for the next 4 years, but he will have to do praiseworthy things. And some of the things he's done so far are the exact opposite. And thanks, Bonnie, for the last minute super chat. And I am Razi Ginsburg on X.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. And if you want to find more of the stuff that we do, check out the Briefly Objective, the clips made from the programs on this channel. Link is in the description below to that, where you find added visuals added to the key points that we discuss on this channel throughout. So thank you very much to both of you. Thank you to our super chatters and our audience. And we'll be back tomorrow with the Daily Objective and the reality show. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Russ.